Thank you for having me. It's definitely an honor, especially as somebody who tunes into your podcast. I'm super grateful to be able
Oh,
to share my testimony.
thank you so much. Yeah, so this is your first time sharing your testimony. So I want to thank you too for just trusting me and trusting the Raised and Redeemed podcast. It's definitely a safe place and we share lots of things here. So you're not alone. And I already know that I relate to a lot of your story, and I know that our listeners do too. Just like a brief overview of some of the things that you have told me about for the listeners to know that we are going to go into today is that you were saved from a life of just living in the world before. You were working in the club, dependent on drugs, and deep in the new age until you had this radical encounter with Jesus that would change everything. So I'm excited to just hear a little bit more about that today.
Alrighty. Well, before I jump into that, I'm going to just give you a quick little brief background um, about my life and how I got there. I actually grew up in a Baptist church. I was born and raised. Um, so I knew of God from an early age, and I knew of religion very well. As a kid, I loved going to VBS, and I was super involved in church, youth, and I even went on retreats. But my home life wasn't really reflective of that. I had a pretty abusive father, and me being the youngest out of three girls, it was a lot of that stuff would be hidden. But after a certain age, like things just couldn't be hidden anymore. My dad was abusive verbally, mentally, emotionally, and physically, mostly to my mom and older sisters. And I had a lot of trauma growing up.
Yeah.
But around the age of 12, one day, my dad's anger and outburst was just too much. And I remember always being sad and confused, and I had a tainted version of what love really was. But yeah, so around the age of 12, my dad one day just went too far and left the house. And after that, um, everything kind of shifted. I remember that my mom just stopped going to church, and it was just my mom and my older sisters, and things just changed. I felt very distant with God as well, and it was it was pretty traumatic, and I was very confused, very depressed, and my relationship with God just kind of diminished.
Yeah.
So around that time is when I'd enter high school, or actually middle school. So around eighth grade, I got my very first boyfriend, and I was so in love with him. He was my first love and my first everything. But unfortunately, I had such a tainted view of love that I just didn't know how to properly love someone. And I always had this fear inside of me that I would be my father. I would be angry. And I remember my mom told me that I was so much like my dad, and that like scarred me. So I never wanted to be like him. I ended up dating this guy for years, almost like 5 years off and on. And he was with me during a very vulnerable time. And so I became like very like possessive over him. And I wanted this relationship to work so much. And I thought that I was going to marry him. And it just, I just became depressed when things wouldn't work out. And I would notice that a lot of my dependency would be on him.
Yeah.
And we ended up not working out, and I was heartbroken. And at this point, I'm in like high school. My sisters had moved out, and my mom had a boyfriend, and she had been living with him. So I just felt out of place. So it was me, my mom, and my now stepdad living all together. And I was sad and depressed, and I would just overwork myself. I'd always be busy in school. I was a great student. I played sports. I was super involved, and basically, anytime I had the opportunity to be busy, I would be busy because it would keep me out of my head and out of being depressed.
Yeah.
Well, during this time, I ended up getting a group of friends, and I never really had much friends because it was always just me and my boyfriend.
Mhm.
And after we broke up, I started hanging out with the wrong group of people, people that he would tell me not to hang out with, and I just didn't see it at the time. And all the things that I grew up being so against, like drugs and drinking and sex, kind of sparked my attention, and I was so easily influenced. And I remember kind of just not being myself anymore because I was so hurt and depressed, and I just wanted to fill a void. And I ended up dabbling in things that I shouldn't have and wouldn't have ever done before, but it kind of was like a band aid on a wound. I smoked weed for the first time, and basically, I felt like I was living a double life because in school, I was student body president. I had like a 4.0 GPA. I played so many sports, but at home and outside of school, um, I was depressed. Um, I was suicidal. I was very short tempered. I very much reflected my father. And then once I started smoking weed, it kind of just felt like an escape route. I felt like I was wearing a mask, honestly. Like I would come home and take off this mask. And basically, around my senior year, so I graduated in 2020 when the whole pandemic and everything kind of came around. But right before my senior year, I had a really bad experience with a poor group of friends who kind of like pushed me into doing something that I wasn't ready to do. And it opened up some sexual trauma from my childhood,
Mm.
um, about being like molested in a sense. And after that, that was kind of like the tip of the iceberg. I remember just being depressed and not being happy with who I was. So, come my senior year, all these things that I had worked so hard for, I just wasn't giving that same kind of energy in school anymore. I remember I was like smoking before I would come to school. I'd leave early to smoke, and I was just going downhill.
Yeah.
And as weird as it sounds, because of the pandemic, it kind of like saved me grade wise. So my senior year got cut short, and my mom and stepdad ended up separating. So me and her moved into this one bedroom apartment, and it was always just me and her. But she would work so hard to keep the bills afloat that I would take advantage of that and find ways to do things I shouldn't be doing.